Hey, my name's Ian. I like making cards, and today I'm going to talk about the 2018 movie The Ritual and create a card for the creature that lurks in the forest. So let's go. In 2017, at an English pub, 5 old friends from college were all sharing a drink after a long time apart. Dom, Phil, Rob, Luke, and Hutch all spent the night discussing plans for a group trip to catch up with one another, but had trouble deciding on an idea. While some of them suggest partying in Vegas or Amsterdam, others recognize how they aren't in their youth anymore and how those days are far behind them. That's when Rob suggested a famous hiking trail called the King's Trail, which spans across Sweden's wide mountains and forests. But this is also shut down. They left the bar after they all shared stories of their businesses and family lives. Luke, however, couldn't help but to feel though he was being left behind. With no partner and being stuck at a dead-end record store job, he wanted to stop at a liquor store on their way home to self-medicate his emotions. After all of his friends refused to go in with him, explaining how they all have early mornings the next day, Luke felt even more detached from the group and asked once more, hoping that he doesn't have to go in alone and look more like a bum than he already feels like, to whom Rob is successfully compelled and decides to accompany him. Shortly after entering the store, they find a store clerk on the ground with a bruise on her face. Before being able to fully process what had happened, 3 robbers exit the back room and begin shouting at the clerk. Luke quickly slipped away and hid behind a liquor aisle, but Rob couldn't find anywhere to go before quickly being spotted. Threatened with a metal pole, Rob reluctantly gave up his wallet, but hesitated when asked for his wedding ring. Luke then grabbed a bottle off the shelf and tried to summon the courage to save his friend, but was unable to find it in time before Rob was slashed in the head by one of the impatient thieves. Luke then opened his eyes to find himself in a tent halfway through the King's Trail with his remaining friends. 6 months later, he thought he would stop reliving that night every night, but being there had only made the dreams more vivid. Finding an isolated beautiful spot atop one of the hilly mountains, the friends had built up a mound of rocks and placed a picture of Rob on them to overlook the vast greenery of the alpine tundra. They all paid their respects in a moment of silence and saluted Rob with a drink. Luke, though, couldn't help but to feel the strong invisible judgment from his friends that led with an offhanded remark from Dom, saying how the tragedy shouldn't have even happened at all. Noticing the tension, Hutch, trying to relieve Luke of his burden, snapped back at Dom, explaining how it did happen, and that all they can do is remember him. Slowly making their way back to the lodge, Dom twists his ankle and badly injures his knee. While knowing their friend is notorious for overreacting, he was clearly having trouble walking, and the trail back was estimated to take another 2 days. Hutch shares with Luke an idea to go off the trail and into the forest, cutting the trip in half and making it back by nightfall. While Luke is unsure, Dom overhears the decision and decides for the group that that is what they should do, and starts hobbling towards the forest using a walking stick as a crutch, leaving the others no choice but to follow. Upon entering the forest, they all felt an instant state of unease, like something wasn't right with the trees themselves, almost as if they were warping and shifting around the group, like the forest was adapting to every movement. Hours passed with the feeling only amplifying the deeper they went. Every so often, one of the members would stop and look behind, insisting that they had heard a branch break or footsteps in the distance, only to be met with the reassurance from the others, rationalizing how animals live in the forest and that they're only freaking themselves out. But only a couple steps later, they were met with a strong foul smell. Looking up to find an elk had been pierced through multiple branches in between 2 trees. The animal was gutted and had been displayed before them like some kind of decoration. Though obvious, whatever had done this had to be a sentient being, that didn't stop the others from once again rationalizing how an animal could have done it, and that they weren't in any danger, even though not a single one of them actually believed that. Luke, though, didn't mislead himself, and noticed it was still bleeding, meaning whatever did do it wasn't far away. With that thought, the group continued slightly faster than they were before. Hours passed slowly with little noise coming from the group, and as the light quickly vanished from the sky, they all became increasingly more worried. To add to the already grim situation, the sky had opened up and began pouring rain, followed closely by the sound of thunder. Unsure if they should keep going and trying to make it out or camp for the night, they came across an old abandoned cabin, as if the forest was beckoning them to stay. The freezing rain had forced Hutch to break down the door and set up camp inside. The others closely followed and decided to check upstairs of the small cabin to make sure they were alone. Just before Luke shut the door, though, he heard a loud rustling, but this one was different than the others. This one was close enough to make the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Flashing his light towards the darkness turned out to be less helpful than he thought, with the endless spanning trees acting as one big wall that surrounded them, with little holes big enough to notice but too small to clearly see past. The screaming of Phil breaks Luke's attention from the forest. Rushing upstairs, the group finds some kind of idol, made of what looked like wooden sticks and the size of a human. It was in the shape of a man, but it had no head, and its hands were replaced with antlers that were put up to where its ears would be, distraught by the headless statue, but otherwise forced to meet the elements outside. They decided to stay the night against their better judgment. Luke found falling asleep difficult, with his brain constantly reminding him how close whatever outside was, but is fully jolted awake after the booming sound of a lightning bolt is heard, but not finished. Opening his eyes to the bright white light flooding in through the windows, as if time had stopped. Opening the door, Luke was met with a familiar-looking liquor shelf, the same one he had seen every night. He was still dreaming, but this one was odd. The tile store floor had been replaced with grass and dirt. After only a second, the shelf directly in front of him had been pushed away from him, disappearing into the trees behind, following closely by loud hoofs, but it wasn't the sound of any ordinary animal. They sounded big, far bigger than any moose or deer could ever be. Luke then noticed 5 small holes in his chest in the shape of a pentagon. And once again he heard loud hoofs, but this time right behind him, turning around to find that all the aisles had disappeared, and he was standing in the middle of the forest. Finding the cabin not far, he heard screaming coming from inside the walls. Finding the source to be Dom and Hutch, who were both having nightmares, but Phil was completely missing. Fully waking up the other two, Luke checked upstairs, having a bad feeling of what he might find. Phil was there, kneeling in front of the idol, praying to it. Asking what he was doing with a shaky voice, Phil seemingly snapped out of his trance and looked back at Luke horrified as he put down his hands and put on his clothes. Stepping out of the cabin, Luke found Dom paralyzed, staring out of the forest. On every encompassing tree around the cabin were hand-carved runes. Hundreds of trees had been somehow carved in the middle of the night, right outside where they were sleeping without anyone noticing. Distracting himself from the terrifying reality, Dom finds a trail next to the cabin that wasn't there before. Arguing that a trail means civilization and people mean rescue, Dom once again left without giving a chance for the others to disagree with him. Hutch, though, noticed that the trail was leading northwest, when the direction of the lodge was southwest, but Dom continued, despite the group's efforts to discourage him. Reluctantly following Dom, the group slowly followed the trail, unsure of what they might find at the end. Only hours had passed when the sky had once again darkened. Looking at each other confused, there was no denying that something truly wasn't right. But unable to travel any further with just flashlights, the group was forced to set up their tents and tried their best to prepare themselves for what they might encounter. Just as Luke was beginning to settle down, he heard loud hoofs outside, the same ones he heard so close to him when waking up from his dream. Turning off his flashlight in an attempt to hide, but knowing that whatever was out there knew exactly where they were, and that there was nothing he could possibly do but wait for the footsteps to slowly become closer and closer, till they eventually passed Luke and faded off. Luke slowly opened the tent to find the rest of the tents untouched. Thinking maybe he was wrong, and it was truly just a normal animal, Luke finally let down his guard, only for Hutch's tent to be violently grabbed and yanked into the trees above. The loud hoofs were back and were now circling the group's camp. But Luke then woke up. It was another dream, but he still heard the same hoofs from his dream, fading into the forest. Stepping outside, he found that Hutch's tent had been torn to shreds. Finding Phil cowering next to Luke's tent, Luke asked if he had seen what happened, but Phil only told him that it was large and that it took Hutch. Waking up Dom, Luke chases Hutch's distant screams. The further he chased, the more disoriented he became, till the rest of the group begged him to stop, so they can find the camp and get supplies. But Luke didn't want to leave Hutch like he did Rob. He didn't want to lose another friend due to his dormant behavior. Although ultimately convinced, in order to save the rest of themselves, they went back to try to find the camp. However, following their tracks back only confused them further. The forest was still playing tricks on them, and there was nothing they could do to escape. Dom and Phil both fell to the ground in exhaustion, but Luke noticed a ridge up ahead and kept going. Looking out, he could see the end. They were almost there, but in between them and the tree line was fire. Looking closely, There were lit torches and multiple cabins. As Luke headed back to tell the others, he found Phil walking towards him, explaining how Dom had gone missing after hearing hoofs in the distance. Before even being able to say another word, Phil was swiftly grabbed by something behind the trees, and the sound of hoofs carrying him away. Still unable to fully see the size of the creature, it was able to move entire trees with ease and was an unstoppable force. Luke then tried to make a run for it, but was quickly stopped by the tree he ran headfirst into. Waking up next to Dom, chained to a wall in a room, Luke figured out that he had been taken by the people in the settlement he saw not too far away, meaning they weren't far from the tree line. Dom, awakening at the same time, asked Luke where they were, but was unable to answer before an old woman had entered the room. Noticing Luke's mark on his chest, she showed a similar mark on hers and gave him water, but didn't stop for Dom as another man came in and took him upstairs. His screaming lasted for hours, tormenting Luke, who was accompanied by another woman that explained how Dom was being prepared for his sacrifice and how Luke was chosen by the creature for his trauma. A few hours later, Dom had been strapped up to a wooden beam outside, and the other people were kneeling towards the forest. Luke, though, managed to escape from his shackles. Finding a musket in the room next to his, he left burning cabin to the ground. Stepping outside, he was finally met face to face with the creature that had been stalking them. It was large, at least 2 stories tall, and was in the shape of a moose, but had a head resembling the idol in the attic of the cabin, a human shape with no head and arms as antlers, with the arms attached to its bottom holding Dom. Luke, spotting them, shot at the creature, but unfazed by the bullet, Luke only had its full attention now. Bolting for the tree line, the loud haunting hoofs followed closely behind him. The surrounding trees began turning into liquor aisles and store tile. One last trick that slowed Luke enough for the creature to catch up and pin him to the floor. Stepping on Luke and making him bow to the creature. Seizing the moment, Luke stabbed the creature with an axe and makes it past the tree line. When the creature catches up, it's unable to cross and can only roar. Luke roars back, victorious against the creature, but is now forever changed. I hope you guys enjoyed that story from the movie The Ritual. I hope you guys enjoyed my art. I'm pretty happy with how it came out, and thank you guys so much for watching.